with Senator. I tried to speak with Senator Clinton at the time. She wouldn't talk to us, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up to her is because someone was hearing her voice, ventriloquism.
It's been done to me, and I don't know why. I don't know who's doing it, what the purpose is.
Now watch this, because what he just described might explain something that was caught on camera during a U.S. House hearing. Look at the woman standing behind Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, and pay close attention to what happens when she speaks.
First, I wanted to introduce into the record page 55 from the committee's interview with FBI employee Roya Demlow, who you just spoke about, which took place on July 17, 2023. They would be representing what I said because I don't have much knowledge of that. They would be misrepresenting.
All you have to do is use voice morphing.
This Harvard scientist exposes claims about CIA mind control weapons still being used today.
They copy your voice from your cell phone and others and put these voices in your head.
And what you're about to witness might explain far more about the world we're living in than most people realize.
But if you cognitively model someone, you have a brain print, like a fingerprint. And if you use autocorrelation techniques, and there's a way, and we'll just kind of wave our hand, functional MRI that you can do at a distance over the earth, you have every human being's brain pattern. You can control 8 billion brains on the planet, potentially. Read them.
Scientists and military researchers have spent decades studying how the brain responds to energy, sound, and stress, often in ways most people never hear about. The idea of neuroweapons and mind control sits in that shadowed space where advanced science meets secrecy. One of the people raising these questions is Robert Duncan, a Harvard-educated scientist with a background in advanced defense research.
He recently died and he was only 53 years old.
What makes his warning unsettling isn't what can be proven on paper, but what leaves no visible trace at all. Think about it. If the battlefield had truly shifted inward, then the most dangerous weapon may be the one you never know is there. For instance, some people say the sound didn't come from outside at all. It didn't travel through the air or enter through the ears. It felt internal, as if the brain itself was being triggered to hear something that wasn't there in the usual way. This idea has a name that sounds unsettling even before you understand it. Voice to skull.
And so if you're programming someone to go after, let's say, a political target.
And it also vibrates things around you so that the voices you hear in your head are also coming from ambient noise or fans or air going through vents. You can hear the same voices coming through those things.
All you have to do is use voice morphing and pipe in the tortures, the pains, and 24 hours, make it an artificial intelligent chatterbot too. And you'll drive the person crazy. The news, the mass news media will just write them out. Oh, they're crazy.
At first, it's easy to dismiss. Hearing sounds without external noise is often associated with mental illness. And for years, that's exactly how many of these claims were treated. But a small group of scientists have pointed out something uncomfortable. There was a documented phenomenon, studied decades ago, where certain types of pulse radio frequency energy can create the perception of sound inside the head. This is known as the microwave auditory effect, or the Frey effect.
There's something called the Frey effect. The Army had it on their website called V2K, and that's how a lot of people refer to it, that can pipe voices into someone's head. You can't plug your ears. It actually vibrates the brain, which is like many concussions, through the small pulses that expand the tissue and then contracts it, then goes to the inner ear where they can hear it. If you just turn that up, it causes brain damage. You're heating the brain. So there are a lot of ways, and a weapon, for example, that I think is reclassified now, but it was done at the University of Nevada as a non-lethal weapon that resonates the dopamine cells of your brain, producing cells of your brain, and it floods it. Now, it worked. The Air Force reclassified it.
The brain can register sound without the ears even being involved. That single fact changes the tone of the conversation. What once sounded impossible now sits in an uneasy space between science and speculation. For people already experiencing unexplained symptoms, this possibility feels less like theory and more like a clue that refuses to go away. And this is where the story stops being abstract. Reports tied to what later became known as Havana syndrome describe clusters of symptoms that didn't fit neatly into familiar diagnoses.
That incapacitates the adversary in a non-lethal way. Not totally non-lethal, though. If you have too much...
They just used it in Venezuela when they went to capture Maduro with real intense, high-intensity direct energy weapons. And I also feel on the left side of my skull, above my left ear, I feel tightening, like my scalp is being constricted, tightened for about a half an hour, like 2 or 3 times every day.
Neurotransmitter in your brain, it's a neurotoxin. It'll also cause brain damage. So brain damage can occur through these weapons that are non-lethal in many different ways.
People experience persistent dizziness, balance problems, headaches, brain fog, sensitivity to sound, and difficulty concentrating. These weren't fleeting complaints. For many, they disrupted daily life and professional performance. Some clinicians began using the term acquired neurosensory dysfunction to describe what they were seeing. The word acquired mattered. It suggested something had changed. Something happened. Brain imaging and vestibular tests in certain cases showed abnormalities consistent with injury, even though there was no physical impact or trauma. That detail alone forced doctors to slow down and take the reports seriously. What made this more alarming was who was affected. These were not random patients. They were diplomats, intelligence personnel, and their families. People trained to handle stress, people whose jobs depended on clarity and control. As similar cases appeared in different countries, governments could no longer treat them as isolated incidents.
The very first CIA agent that came forward and said, I heard these crickets and this sound, and my brain hasn't been the same since. He's gone through the same process as Len Barry, just block after block of government bureaucracy saying, you're delusional, this technology doesn't exist. And, you don't have to go to the Directed Energy Directorate of the Air Force to know that we've been working on this for a long time with our NATO allies. And so a lot of the work on these concussion weapons, non-lethal weapons, are done under that directorate.
At the center of many theories is a simple idea with complicated implications: directed energy. Unlike energy that spreads out naturally, directed energy is focused. It goes where it's aimed. Microwaves are often mentioned because they already interact with the human body in limited, well-documented ways. Under certain conditions, they can cause heating effects, pressure sensations, or changes in perception. That doesn't mean they were designed as weapons, but it does mean they're not neutral to biology.
The brain damage is being done because the brain rewires itself more rapidly. Let's say if you lose your eyesight, then your hearing and taste, smell, your taste and smell get better. Your brain adapts faster. During this adaptation process, you can insert an external signal, sort of like hiving brains together.
Physical symptoms are only part of the damage. When the brain is overwhelmed by pain, confusion, or constant stress, it begins to change how it processes reality. Focus narrows, memory slips, confidence erodes. The mind starts working against itself.
There's natural schizophrenia. There's a whole bunch of chemical imbalances, etc.
Right.
These weapons can actually induce and mimic all those diseases and effects. The conversations, the scripts, they're called, are always the same. And I've heard them all. They're slightly tailored for each individual, but they're scripts. And they're meant to confuse the very derogatory, That's just typical breakdown. If you ever been to boot camp, you're a worm until you're part of the team. And why would you want to break down the ego of that person? To rebuild it. So this gets into creating Manchurian candidates, split personality spies, and information couriers, people that will carry messages to other places without being aware that they're actually doing it.
Cognitive overload doesn't require force. Uncertainty alone can push people to the edge. When symptoms come and go without warning, the nervous system stays on high alert. Sleep suffers, judgment weakens, stress compounds stress. Over time, the person isn't just injured, they're destabilized. This is why psychological breakdown matters in this story. Even without proving a weapon, the outcome looks the same. A person questions their own thoughts. Others question them too. Support systems strain, authority becomes harder to trust, whether intentional or accidental. The effects mirrors psychological warfare, disorientation, isolation, and loss of control. And once a person reaches that state, another question quietly follows. What comes next? Because once you can break a mind, you can also rewrite it. That fear isn't new. The idea of the Manchurian candidate has haunted public consciousness for decades, rooted in Cold War.
They can actually zap your brain so that you forget what you're doing as you're doing it, like cooking, taking out the garbage. You'll forget your place, what in your steps that you're doing, and end up leaving it and thinking about something else because they input another thought. They stimulate your brain in another area to make you think of something else, and you end up leaving projects undone all over the place, making you stagnant, running in circles.
Experiments, psychological conditioning, and covert research into behavioral control. The concern was never about instant mind control, but about gradual influence, shaping beliefs, reactions, and identity under sustained pressure.
They're told by the voices, the V2K. So they'll say, we're the Russian government, we're the Chinese government, we're evil aliens. The trickery really is that great when you're under hypnosis that people will believe something other than a massive government could do this.
Modern discussions revive that fear in a new context. If stress, trauma, and neurological disruption can weaken a person's sense of self, then influence becomes easier. Not absolute control, but nudging behavior, altering perception, or steering decisions without the person fully realizing it. And when influence no longer feels internal but authoritative, the stakes change. Because the most powerful manipulation isn't suggestion, it's command. The moment a
And the voices that I hear are of 3 black people I know here in town and Kamala Harris. So that if I went and lashed out at these people, it would have me attacking minorities. And that is part of what they're doing to me. And I know it's not my black friends and Kamala Harris that are doing this.
message feels unquestionable, resistance fades. With this comes the weapon that was never meant to be known publicly. Claims surrounding the so-called voice of God weapons take the fear even further. The idea centers on authority-based auditory influence, sounds or messages perceived as external truth, command, or guidance. Not persuasion through argument, but through perceived certainty.
There is a classification weapon system called the voice of God, and I've met some of these people, but they're convinced and they'll do whatever this voice tells them, and that's the dangerous part. That's another form of trickery. God wants you to go on a spree, let's say. Some people would do that.
Whether real or exaggerated, the ethical concern is clear. If a person believes a message carries unquestionable authority, resistance weakens. History
They used it in Desert Storm, Desert Shield on the Iraqis, and the voice of Allah told them to lay down their weapons and take their weapons apart and get out of the foxholes with your hands up. And that's what they did. They were just walking towards the American troops with their hands up. That's why it was just a 10-hour or 100-hour war. It was over really quick because they used this system, the voice to skull system, in Iraq against the Iraqi warriors.
knows how powerful belief can be when it feels absolute. Even the suggestion that such influence might exist forces uncomfortable questions about consent, autonomy, and abuse. And if belief can be shaped in one mind, it doesn't stop there. Because ideas don't stay contained, they spread. These are often called mind viruses, not because they are technical,
That was
but
back in
because
the
they behave
60s,
like
the Russian
contagion.
stuff.
When people adopt a belief and reinforce it collectively, doubt disappears. Stories harden into truth. Whether the original cause was physical, psychological, or misunderstood, belief itself becomes a force. And once belief stops at the group level, it doesn't stay contained. It scales. It crosses borders, cultures, and screens. What begins as shared conviction can turn into shared emotion. For those who believe it can't operate on a global scale, that assumption no longer holds. Human emotion has always been contagious, but technology has changed the speed and reach. When fear, anxiety, or outrage spreads across networks, millions of people can begin reacting in sync without ever meeting. This is what some describe as an empathy machine. Not a device, but a system where emotions align and reinforce one another from across borders. Pressure doesn't have to be applied directly. It can be absorbed socially, amplified culturally, and sustained psychologically. What starts as individual stress becomes collective tension. Some of these ideas sound extreme until you look at what militaries openly research. Modern psychological warfare focuses less on destruction and more on perception.
How could you disable a person? Okay, most people think directed energy, a laser beam. Okay, you burn them a few times. That's not really disabling them. Making them dysfunctional, that would be scrambling their brains. That'd be dopamine dumps. That would be making, concussion weapons. That would be somehow affecting their nervous system so they drop on the ground. So it's a combination of psychological warfare as well as directed energy weapons, along with the voice of God weapons, with voice morphing, with artificial intelligence chatterbots. It's the most complex weapon system we have put together ever.
Yeah, the chatterbots repeat certain words and certain phrases twice every second, so it just gets drilled in you over and over and over. Like the derogatory names they call me, like rapist and pedo.
As a species.
Technologies involving lasers, light projection, and advanced signaling have been tested for communication, deterrence, and non-lethal control. These systems are not proof of mind manipulation, but they show how perception itself has become a strategic domain.
You have no ability to discern, like looking at a television, what goes into your mind. It is directly stimulating those neurons. All the senses have been bypassed, like in the movie The Matrix. They're literally plugged in to a synthetic controlled reality that they cannot differentiate from their external bodily senses.
The goal isn't always to injure, it's to confuse, intimidate, or influence behavior. History shows that militaries experiment first, then adapt. What remains classified often fuels speculation, especially when paired with unexplained events. But while theories compete and investigations stall, the human cost continues quietly in the background. Behind every theory are people trying to survive their symptoms. Many seek neurological care, therapy, and rehabilitation with mixed results. Some improve, others struggle for years. What hurts most isn't always the pain, it's not being believed.
I've lost everything.
Victims often face long waits, fragmented care, and pressure to accept explanations that don't match their experience.
Yep, my own family
Recognition
doesn't believe
matters. Support matters. Even without
because they're
definitive
being
answers,
affected too.
compassion can reduce harm. Maybe the real question isn't whether these weapons exist, or whether Havana syndrome will ever be traced to a single cause. Maybe the real question is who gets to decide what counts as proof, and who is expected to live with uncertainty. If something unseen can disrupt the mind, the
It's
body,
invisible.
and the life without leaving clear evidence, then belief becomes a kind of power. And power is rarely shared equally. So the question lingers, unresolved and uncomfortable. If these tools are real, who decides when they're used? And on whom?
So we got some big news coming in